The wind howled like a pack of wolves across the New Mexico plains. Jack Sullivan pulled his hat down tight as rain pelted his face. This wasn't just any storm. This was the kind that made old-timers talk about the wrath of heaven itself. Jack had been working his small ranch for nearly 5 years now. It wasn't much, just a wooden cabin, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and enough land to keep a dozen horses and some cattle. But it was his, earned with sweat and hard work after the war ended. The horses were spooked, dancing nervously in their stalls as thunder cracked overhead. Jack had just thrown the last bale of hay when lightning lit up the world outside. In that brief flash of light, he saw something that made him freeze, a figure. Someone was out there, stumbling through the storm like a drunk man leaving a saloon. But this was no drunk. The person collapsed right near his fence, falling hard into the mud. Jack's hand went to the rifle by the barn door. These were dangerous times. Cattle thieves roamed the territory. Outlaws hid in every canyon. And there were stories whispered in town about Apache warriors raiding homesteads in revenge for broken treaties. He should probably stay inside. Lock the door. Wait till morning. That's what a smart man would do. But Jack had never been one to let someone die on his doorstep, no matter who they were. His mama had raised him better than that. With a curse at his own foolishness, he grabbed a lantern and ran out into the rain. The storm tried to knock him down with every step. Rain came at him sideways, soaking through his shirt in seconds. When he reached the fallen figure, he nearly dropped his lantern in surprise. It was a woman, but not like any woman he'd seen before. She was tall, powerfully built, with shoulders broader than most men he knew. Even lying in the mud, he could tell she stood well over 6 feet. Her clothing was Apache, decorated with traditional patterns he'd seen in trading posts. Then he saw the blood. It mixed with the rainwater, spreading dark across her shoulder. She'd been shot, and recently too. Every instinct told Jack to step back. Helping an Apache, especially now, could get him killed. The territorial militia had been talking big about clearing out the natives. His neighbors wouldn't understand. They'd call him a traitor, maybe worse. But looking at her face, pale with blood loss and rain-soaked, he saw only another human being dying in the mud. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Jack tried to lift her. Lord, she was heavy. All that height and muscle made her dead weight almost impossible to move. He slipped twice in the mud before getting a good grip. Half dragging, half carrying, he pulled her toward the barn, his back screaming in protest. The barn was warm and dry compared to the storm outside. Jack laid her down on a pile of hay in the corner, breathing hard from the effort. His hands shook as he held up the lantern to get a better look. The gunshot wound was in her left shoulder, still bleeding. She was burning up with fever. Her face flushed despite the cold rain. Her breathing came shallow and quick, like a bird with a broken wing. Jack had seen enough bullet wounds during the war to know what needed doing. He'd patched up his share of soldiers, though he'd never been any good at it. Still, he knew the bullet had to come out, and quick, before infection set in worse than it already had. He ran to the house and grabbed his medical supplies. They weren't much, just what any rancher kept on hand for injuries. Whiskey for cleaning, a knife he'd sterilized in fire, clean cloth for bandages, and needle and thread for stitching. Back in the barn, the woman hadn't moved. She muttered something in Apache, words he couldn't understand. Fever dreams, probably. Jack rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The bullet was lodged deep. His hands, rough from ranch work, tried to be gentle as he probed the wound. She groaned but didn't wake, which was a mercy. The bullet finally came free, a twisted piece of lead that he tossed into the dirt. He poured whiskey into the wound. She jerked and cried out, her eyes flying open for just a moment. They were dark and fierce, even clouded with pain and fever. Then they closed again as she slipped back into unconsciousness. Jack cleaned the wound as best he could and wrapped it tight with clean bandages. Her shirt was ruined, so he covered her with horse blankets to keep her warm. There wasn't much else he could do now except wait and pray. All through that night, Jack sat with his back against a post, rifle across his lap, watching her breathe. The storm raged outside, shaking the barn walls. Every gust of wind made him jump, thinking it might be Apache warriors coming to find her. What had he gotten himself into? This woman was Apache, and from the look of her clothing and the way she carried herself even unconscious, she was someone important. A warrior, maybe. The Apache didn't send their women to fight often, but when they did, those women were feared as much as any man. If her people came looking, they might think he'd shot her. They might burn his ranch to the ground before he could explain. And if the local folks found out he was harboring an Apache, well, they might do the same. But looking at her lying there fighting for life, Jack couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. Right was right, no matter the color of a person's skin or which side of an invisible line they were born on. As dawn broke and the storm finally passed, the woman's fever seemed to ease just a bit. Her breathing grew steadier. Jack allowed himself to hope she might live through this. He just had to figure out what to do when she woke up. And hope that when morning came, he wouldn't find himself surrounded by Apache warriors with revenge on their minds. Outside, the sun rose on a world washed clean by rain. Everything looked peaceful, beautiful even, but Jack knew better. He'd just stepped into something that could change everything, and there was no going back now. The woman stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep. Jack checked her bandages, found them holding. All he could do now was wait and see what fate had in store for a cowboy who'd chosen mercy over sense on a stormy night in New Mexico. 3 days passed like 3 years. Jack barely slept, moving between the barn and his cabin, always keeping one eye on his unexpected guest and the other on the horizon. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she'd wake for a few minutes, her eyes wild with fever and confusion. She'd speak in Apache, urgent words that Jack couldn't understand. He'd give her water and she'd drink desperately before falling back into feverish sleep. Jack changed her bandages twice a day. The wound was fighting infection, but it wasn't getting worse, which he counted as a small victory. He'd seen men die from less serious injuries when fever took hold. Whatever else she was, this woman was a fighter. On the second night, he heard her crying out in her sleep. Not in pain exactly, but in distress. Jack moved closer with his lantern and saw tears running down her face. Even warriors had nightmares, it seemed. Without thinking, he placed a cool cloth on her forehead, the way his mother had done when he was sick as a child. She quieted at his touch, which surprised him. Maybe somewhere in her fever dreams she knew someone was trying to help. By day 3, Jack was exhausted. He'd been running on coffee and worry, jumping at every sound. His ranch hand, old Pete, had come by once asking questions. Jack had made excuses about being sick himself, sent Pete away. The fewer people who knew about this, the better. Then on the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Jack was bringing fresh water when he noticed her eyes were open. Actually open, not the glazed fever stare he'd seen before. These eyes were sharp, aware, and watching him with an intensity that made him stop in his tracks. She tried to sit up and immediately winced, her hand going to her wounded shoulder. Jack set down the water and held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said softly. "You've been shot. Lost a lot of blood." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes moving from his face to the rifle leaning against the wall, then to the bandages on her shoulder. Jack could practically see her mind working, putting pieces together. When she spoke, her voice was rough from days without use. The words came in broken English mixed with Spanish, but Jack could understand enough. "You help me?" She seemed genuinely puzzled by this fact. "Found you during the storm," Jack explained. "Couldn't just leave you to die." She watched him carefully, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she said something that sounded like a name. "Desba, that your name?" Jack asked. When she nodded, he pointed to himself. Jack Sullivan." "Jack," she repeated, testing the name. Then she asked, "Why?" It was a good question. Why had he helped her? Jack thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. This answer seemed to confuse her more than anything else he could have said. She looked around the barn, taking in her surroundings. "How long?" 3 days, Jack told her. "You've had a fever. Infection's trying to set in, but I think we're winning that fight." Desba touched her bandaged shoulder again carefully. When she looked back at him, there was something new in her eyes. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of respect. Over the next few days, she grew stronger. Jack learned that she spoke better English than she'd first let on. She'd learned it at a mission school as a child, before everything went bad between her people and the settlers. The Spanish came from traders she'd dealt with. Jack also learned that Desba was rare among her people. She'd been born unusually tall and strong, and when she showed an aptitude for fighting, the elders had allowed her to train as a warrior. It wasn't common, she explained, but it wasn't unheard of either. The Apache respected ability over tradition when it mattered. What happened to you? Jack finally asked on the 5th day. Who shot you? Desba's face darkened. She struggled to find the English words, switching to Spanish when she couldn't. Jack, who'd picked up some Spanish from working with vaqueros, managed to piece together her story. She'd been tracking cattle thieves. White men, she emphasized, not Apache. These men had been stealing from both settlers and her people, taking cattle and horses wherever they could find them. But the worst part wasn't the stealing itself. They want war, Desba said, her English clear on those important words. They steal from your people, leave Apache signs. Steal from my people, leave white man's tracks. They want us to fight. Jack felt his blood run cold. He'd heard rumors in town about Apache raids, cattle going missing, tensions rising. What if it had all been a setup? What if someone was deliberately trying to start a war? Why, he asked. Why would anyone want that? Desba's laugh was bitter. Land, always land. We fight, we kill each other, they take what's left. It made a sick kind of sense. Jack had seen it before during the war. Rich men getting richer while common folks did the dying. He looked at this tall Apache woman sitting in his barn, fighting infection from a bullet wound, and realized they'd both been played for fools. You were tracking them alone? He asked. She nodded. I find proof, bring to elders. Show them white men, not all enemies. Show settlers Apache, not all raiders. Stop war before it starts. But they found you first. Yes. Her hand went to her shoulder again. 5 men. I was following their trail. They ambush me, I fight, but... She gestured to the wound. I run, storm comes. I think I die. Then I wake here. Jack poured her more water, his mind racing. This was bigger than he'd thought. Desba wasn't just some warrior who'd gotten in over her head. She'd been trying to prevent a war and nearly died for it. Your people, he said carefully. They'll be looking for you. Desba's face grew serious. Yes, soon, my father is war chief. When I not return, he will think settlers killed me. He will... She struggled for the word, then made a gesture that clearly meant violence. How long before they come? She thought about it. I tell elders I return in 10 days. Maybe less. I am already gone. 6 days. Jack did the math. That meant they had maybe 4 days before Apache warriors came looking for her. 4 days to figure out how to prove that not all white settlers were enemies, and that the real enemy was the gang of thieves trying to start a war. These men who shot you, Jack said, you know where they are? Desba smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. I know, they have camp in Red Canyon, 2 days' ride. They keep stolen cattle there. Her eyes met his. You know this place? Jack did know it. Red Canyon was a natural fortress, easy to defend, hard to approach without being seen. If the thieves were holed up there with stolen livestock, they could sit pretty for months. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Desba leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. You saved my life, Jack Sullivan. My people have honor. I owe you debt. But also, she paused, choosing her words carefully. You help me, maybe I help you. We find thieves. We get proof. We stop war. Your people safe. My people safe. It was crazy. A cowboy and an Apache warrior, teaming up to stop a range war. Old Pete would think he'd lost his mind. The folks in town would probably hang him. But looking at Desba, seeing the determination in her eyes, Jack realized something. She was risking everything to stop this war. She'd nearly died trying. Could he do any less? All right, he said, surprising himself. But first you need to heal more. Can't go chasing thieves if you can barely stand. Desba nodded, settling back into the hay. We have time, few days. You teach me more about settlers, their ways. I teach you tracking, how to move quiet like Apache. We need each other for this to work. Jack extended his hand. After a moment, Desba gripped it. Her hand was strong, calloused from hard work and fighting. It was the handshake of a warrior and a cowboy making a pact that could save lives or get them both killed. Outside the barn, the sun was setting on another day. Time was running out, and somewhere out there, dangerous men were planning their next move. But for now, in this small barn in New Mexico, an unlikely alliance had been born. Jack just hoped they'd both live long enough to see it through. The next few days brought changes Jack never expected. Desba healed faster than seemed possible. By the 6th day, she was walking around the barn, testing her strength. By the 7th, she was insisting on helping with chores despite Jack's protests. Warrior does not sit idle, she told him firmly, carrying a bucket of water with her good arm. Makes me weak. Jack learned quickly that arguing with Desba was like arguing with a mountain. The mountain wasn't going to move, so you might as well save your breath. They fell into an odd rhythm. Early mornings, Jack would tend the horses while Desba practiced with her weapons, moving through fighting forms that looked like a deadly dance. Her shoulder was still healing, so she went slow, but even at half speed, Jack could see the skill involved. During the day, they talked. Really talked. Desba told him about her people, their ways of seeing the world, how they believed the land belonged to everyone and no one, that it couldn't be owned like a horse or a rifle, how they'd watched as treaties were signed and then broken, as promises turned to lies. "My grandfather," she said one afternoon while they mended fence together. "He believed white men could be trusted. He signed paper, gave land, moved tribe to reservation, then more white men came. They said paper was wrong, that we must move again. My grandfather learned too late that some men's words mean nothing." Jack didn't know what to say to that. He'd heard stories from his side too, about savage raids and innocent families killed. But sitting here with Desba, watching her work with quiet determination, those stories felt incomplete. Like half a truth told to justify the other half. "Not all of us are like that," he finally said. "I know," Desba replied. "You prove this. But how many more like you? How many will see Apache and shoot first, ask questions after?" It was a fair question. Jack had seen the hate in town, heard the talk. Most folks saw Indians as something less than human, obstacles to be removed. The idea of actually talking to them, learning from them, would seem crazy. But Jack was learning. Desba taught him things he'd never known about the land he'd lived on for 5 years. She showed him plants that could heal wounds or purify water. She taught him to read tracks, not just to follow them, but to understand the story they told. "Here," she said one morning, kneeling by a set of prints near the creek. "Horse with rider. See how the prints are deeper on one side? The rider favors his left leg, probably old injury. And here the horse hesitates before crossing. Young horse, not well trained." Jack stared at the same tracks he'd walked past a dozen times. He'd seen hoof prints, nothing more. But Desba saw a whole story written in the dirt. In return, Jack taught her about settler ways, how land ownership worked, why it mattered so much to his people. He explained about the war that had just ended, how it had torn the country apart and left everyone suspicious and angry. "We're all just trying to survive," he told her. "Build something that lasts. Problem is, everyone thinks there's only one way to do that, and it's their way." Desba nodded slowly. "This I understand. My people have same problem. Young warriors want to fight, prove strength. Old chiefs want peace, but also want to keep honor. Hard to find path that satisfies both." It was during these conversations that Jack began to understand the bigger picture. The cattle thieves weren't just criminals looking for easy money. They were counting on prejudice and fear, knowing that both sides would assume the worst about each other. "It's smart," Jack admitted reluctantly. "Evil, but smart. They steal from settlers, leave Apache signs. Settlers get angry, demand army action. They steal from Apache, leave settler tracks. Your people prepare for war. Pretty soon, both sides are so worked up that all it takes is one spark. And then they sit back and watch us kill each other." Desba finished. "When the fighting is over, they take the land. No one left to stop them." They were sitting on Jack's porch as the sun set on the 8th day. Desba's wound was healing well now, the angry red fading to pink. She could use her arm again, though it still pained her to lift anything heavy. Time was running out. By Desba's count, her people would start looking for her in 2 days, maybe less. If they found her here, if they thought Jack had captured or hurt her, there'd be blood. And if they didn't find her at all, they'd assume the worst and the war would start anyway. "We need to move soon," Desba said, echoing Jack's thoughts. "Tomorrow we ride to Red Canyon. Find the thieves, get proof. Just the two of us against a dozen armed men?" Jack shook his head. "That's suicide. You have better idea?" Jack didn't, which was the problem. They couldn't go to the army. Half the soldiers would shoot Desba on sight. The territorial marshal was 3 days right away, and even if they could reach him, would he believe a cowboy and an Apache warrior spinning a tale about a conspiracy? "We need evidence," Jack said, thinking out loud. "Something solid. The stolen cattle would work. If we can prove they have livestock with both settler and Apache brands, that shows they're stealing from both sides." Desba nodded. "Yes, but how we get close enough to see brands without being shot?" That was the question. Red Canyon was a natural fortress. Anyone approaching would be spotted long before they got close. And even if they somehow made it to the thieves' camp, fighting their way out with a herd of cattle would be impossible. We scout it first, Jack decided. Get a look at their setup, see how many men they have, where they keep the cattle. Then we make a plan. And if they see us? Jack touched the rifle leaning against the wall. Then we make sure we see them first. They spent that evening preparing. Jack gathered supplies for a hard ride: dried meat, coffee, ammunition. Desba sharpened her knife and checked her rifle, a Winchester she'd taken from a soldier who'd tried to kill her father years ago. She'd kept it as a trophy and learned to shoot it better than most white men. As night fell, Jack felt the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't like breaking a horse or mending fence. This was riding into danger with someone he'd known for barely a week, trusting his life to a woman his neighbors would call an enemy. But he'd made his choice when he pulled her from the mud during that storm. There was no going back now, Jack, Desba said from across the barn. You know this may not work. We may die tomorrow. I know, then why you do this? You could leave, ride to another territory, start new ranch where no one knows you helped Apache. Jack thought about it. She was right. He could run, save his own skin. Let the war come and hide from it somewhere far away. My daddy used to say something, Jack told her. He said a man isn't measured by what he does when it's easy. He's measured by what he does when it's hard. When doing the right thing might cost him everything. Desba was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your father was wise man. He was a stubborn fool who got himself killed at Gettysburg standing his ground when he should have retreated, Jack replied. But he was right about this. Some things are worth standing for. The Apache have similar saying, Desba said. A warrior's honor is not in never falling, but in rising each time he falls. They both smiled at that, recognizing the truth in both philosophies. Different peoples, different words, but the same core idea. Do what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That night, Jack barely slept. He kept thinking about Red Canyon, about the thieves waiting there, about what would happen when Desba's people came looking for her. So many ways this could go wrong. So many ways they could both end up dead. But he also thought about what would happen if they did nothing. Settlers and Apache killing each other while the real criminals watched and profited. Good people on both sides dying because of lies and manipulation. Before dawn, Desba was already up and ready. She'd braided her long black hair tight and wore her traditional warrior clothing. Looking at her in the early morning light, tall and fierce and determined, Jack understood why her people respected her. She was formidable. You ready? She asked. Jack saddled his horse and checked his rifle one more time. Ready as I'll ever be. They rode out as the sun rose, heading toward Red Canyon and whatever fate had waiting for them there. Jack looked back once at his small ranch, his home for the past 5 years. He wondered if he'd ever see it again. Beside him, Desba rode straight and tall, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She started singing something low and rhythmic in Apache, a warrior's song probably. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. They were riding into battle, and whatever happened, they'd face it together. An unlikely alliance, maybe, but sometimes the unlikeliest alliances were the strongest. The morning sun climbed higher, and they rode on toward Red Canyon, toward danger, toward what Jack hoped would be proof enough to stop a war. The ride to Red Canyon took most of the day. Desba set a hard pace, her horse moving with the easy grace of an animal that had been raised by people who lived on horseback. Jack kept up, but barely. His ranch horse wasn't used to this kind of distance. They rode through country Jack had seen before but never really noticed. Desba pointed out signs he'd walked past 100 times. A bent branch here meant deer had passed through recently. Scratches on rock there showed where a mountain lion marked its territory. The land was alive with stories if you knew how to read them. You settlers look but do not see, Desba said at one point. The land speaks always, but you are too loud to hear. Jack couldn't argue with that. He'd been so focused on building and owning that he'd never stopped to actually understand what he owned. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Desba chose a spot with good cover and a clear view of the surrounding terrain. Jack was learning that she never did anything without thinking 3 steps ahead. Tell me about the leader, Desba said while they ate dried meat and hard bread. The man who shot me. Jack had been thinking about this. From Desba's description and what he knew about local outlaws, he had a pretty good idea who they were dealing with. If I'm right, his name's Clayton Burke, Jack said. Former cavalry officer. Got kicked out about 2 years back for killing Apache prisoners after they'd surrendered. Word is he hates Indians with a passion. Desba's face darkened. I know this name. My people know it too. He led raid on winter camp 3 years ago. Killed women, children. Said they were all warriors. The way she said it made Jack's stomach turn. He'd heard the stories differently in town, of course. In the settler version, Burke was a hero who'd stopped a dangerous Apache band. But looking at Desba's face, Jack realized which version was probably true. He's smart and he's mean, Jack continued. And if he's running this operation, he's got a plan. This isn't just about stealing cattle. He wants a war, and he'll do whatever it takes to start one. Then we stop him, Desba said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. They reached the area around Red Canyon by late afternoon. Desba insisted they leave the horses a mile away and approach on foot. Too easy to spot riders, she explained. On foot, they could move quiet, use the land to hide. Jack followed her lead as they moved through the scrubland. She moved like smoke, barely making a sound despite her size. Jack tried his best to copy her movements, placing his feet where she placed hers, avoiding dry branches and loose rocks. It took an hour to cover the last mile. When they finally reached a ridge overlooking Red Canyon, the sun was starting to set. Desba motioned for Jack to get down, and they crawled the last few yards to peer over the edge. What Jack saw made his blood run cold. The canyon below was bigger than he'd expected, with steep red walls on 3 sides and only one narrow entrance. It was a perfect hideout exactly as Desba had described, but it was what filled the canyon that mattered. Cattle. Dozens of them, maybe close to 100 head, all penned in a natural corral near the back wall. Even from this distance, Jack could see they were a mixed bunch, different colors and sizes. Stolen from different ranches, almost certainly, and the men. Jack counted at least 15, maybe more. They had a camp set up near the canyon entrance with tents and a cooking fire. Several men stood guard, rifles in hand, watching the approaches. These weren't just cattle thieves. This was an organized operation. Desba pulled out a small-looking glass she'd brought and studied the cattle carefully. After a long moment, she handed it to Jack and pointed. Through the glass, Jack could see what she'd spotted. Some of the cattle had brands he recognized. There was the double bar from the Henderson Ranch, the Circle T from old Tom Pritchard's spread, and there, on a group of horses, he saw markings he'd only seen once before. Painted symbols that Desba had explained were how Apache marked their horses. You see? Desba whispered. They have cattle from your people and horses from mine. All in one place. It was exactly the proof they needed. But it was also guarded by 15 armed men in a fortress that would be suicide to attack directly. They watched as the sun set, and the men below settled in for the night. Jack noticed the guards changed in shifts, meaning someone was always watching. These men were organized and careful. Burke had trained them well. There, Desba pointed to a spot near the back of the canyon. See where the wall is lower? A good climber could get down there and maybe move some cattle out the back way. Jack studied it. The wall was maybe 15 feet high at that point, crumbling in places. It might be possible to climb down, but getting cattle out that way, and doing it without being heard by 15 men? Even if we got down there, Jack said, how do we get the cattle out? And how do we prove where they came from? We need someone official to see this, someone who can verify the brands. Desba nodded slowly. The marshal you spoke of. How far? 3 days' ride to his office in Santa Fe, but we can't both go. If your people show up at my ranch and find it empty, they'll think the worst, and we can't leave these thieves unwatched. They might move the cattle. They had a problem. The marshal needed to see the evidence, but they couldn't both leave and they couldn't both stay. Jack was trying to work through the options when Desba spoke again. I see something else, she said, looking through the glass. There by the lead tent. Jack took the glass and looked where she indicated. A man stood by the largest tent, tall and commanding even in the fading light. He had a military bearing, stood like someone used to giving orders and being obeyed. That's Burke, Jack said, recognizing the description he'd heard in town. I'd bet my ranch on it. As they watched, Burke called the men together. They gathered around the fire, and though Jack couldn't hear the words, he could see Burke pointing and gesturing, clearly giving instructions. They're planning something, Desba said. See how he moves? He's preparing them for action. She was right. Jack had seen enough military operations during the war to recognize the signs. Burke was briefing his men for a mission, which meant they'd be moving soon. We need to hear what they're saying, Jack said. Too dangerous. Guards will see us if we get closer. But Jack was already thinking, The canyon walls created echoes, carried sound in strange ways. If they could get to the right position, maybe they could hear without being seen. Carefully, they worked their way around the ridge, staying low and moving slow. Desba led the way, finding paths Jack would never have seen in the growing darkness. They ended up at a different angle, where the canyon walls formed a natural sound funnel, and there, faint but clear, they could hear Burke's voice carrying up from below. 2 days, Burke was saying. We hit the Apache camp at dawn. Make it look like a settler raid. Kill as many as we can, take some horses. That'll push them over the edge. Another voice, younger, asked a question Jack couldn't quite catch. Burke's response was clear enough. Don't matter if some of you don't make it back. That's the point. Dead bodies on both sides, everyone thinking the other started it. The army'll have no choice but to clear out the Apache and we'll have this whole territory to ourselves. Jack felt Desba go rigid beside him. Her hand gripped her rifle so tight he could hear the leather of her glove creak. We have to warn them, she whispered urgently. My people. They don't know this is coming. And we have to get that marshal, Jack added. This proves conspiracy. This isn't just theft anymore. It's planned murder. They backed away from the edge carefully, not speaking until they were well away from the canyon. When they finally stopped, Desba was shaking with rage. My father's camp, she said. That's where they'll attack. Where I was supposed to return. Burke must have followed me, learned the location. Jack's mind raced. They had maybe 2 days, probably less. Not enough time to reach the marshal and get back. Barely enough time to warn Desba's people if they rode hard. We split up, Jack decided. You ride to your people, warn them. I'll go to the marshal, bring him back with proof of what we heard. You won't make it in time, Desba said. 3 days there, 3 days back. The attack comes in 2 days. Then I'll make it in 2 days. Ride straight through, change horses at way stations. Desba looked at him for a long moment. If you go to my people, they will kill you. They don't know you. They'll see white man approaching their camp, they'll shoot first. And if you go to the marshal, you think he'll believe an Apache warrior over a decorated cavalry officer, even a criminal one? They stared at each other, both seeing the impossible choice. Either option was almost certain death, but they had to try. Too many lives hung in the balance. Finally, Desba spoke. We warn my people together, both of us. Then we find a way to stop Burke before he attacks. That's crazy. We can't fight 15 men. No, Desba agreed. But we don't have to fight them. We just have to stop the attack. Make them miss their timing. Give us time to get help. It was still crazy, but Jack couldn't think of a better plan. They made their way back to the horses in the dark, moving by feel and instinct. Every sound made Jack jump, expecting to hear shouts of discovery from behind them. But they made it to the horses unmolested. As they mounted up, Desba looked at Jack across the darkness. You are brave man, Jack Sullivan. Foolish, maybe, but brave. Right back at you, Jack replied. Now let's ride before I come to my senses. Dawn found them still riding, the horses tired but holding up. Desba had been quiet for the last hour and Jack could see the tension in her shoulders. They were getting close to her people's camp and she was preparing for what might come. When we arrive, she said finally, stay behind me. Let me speak first. If they see white man before they see me, they shoot. No questions. Jack nodded, his throat dry. He'd fought in the war, seen men die, pulled triggers himself. But riding into an Apache camp as the only white man for miles, that was a different kind of fear. The sun climbed higher and Desba led them into rougher country. The land here was all rocks and scrub, with mesas rising in the distance. Jack wouldn't have seen the path if Desba hadn't been leading. This was Apache land and they knew how to hide in plain sight. Then Desba stopped her horse abruptly, holding up her hand. Jack pulled up beside her and she pointed to the ground. Fresh tracks, lots of them. Horses and people, and recent too. Scouts, Desba said quietly. They've already seen us. They're watching now. Jack resisted the urge to look around. Somewhere out there, Apache warriors had rifles pointed at him. One wrong move and he'd never even see who killed him. Desba did something then that surprised Jack. She began to sing, her voice carrying across the empty land. It was the same song she'd sung when they rode out to Red Canyon, but this time Jack understood it wasn't just a warrior's song. It was an announcement, a way of identifying herself to her people. After a moment, an answering call came from the rocks ahead. Desba visibly relaxed. They know me, she said, but they don't understand why white man rides with me. This next part, it will be difficult. Trust me, and don't reach for your weapon no matter what happens. Before Jack could respond, Apache warriors emerged from the landscape like ghosts. One moment the path ahead was empty, the next it was filled with armed men. They surrounded Jack and Desba in seconds, rifles raised, faces hard. Desba spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing to Jack and to herself. The warriors listened, but their weapons never lowered. One of them, an older man with gray in his hair and scars across his chest, stepped forward. The way the others deferred to him told Jack this was someone important. The old warrior and Desba had a heated conversation. Jack couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. The warrior was angry, demanding explanations. Desba was arguing back, fierce and insistent. Several times she pointed at Jack, then at her wounded shoulder, then back toward Red Canyon. Finally, the old warrior turned to look at Jack directly. His eyes were hard as stone, measuring, judging. When he spoke, his English was broken but understandable. "You are Jack Sullivan? The one who helped my daughter?" Jack nearly fell off his horse in surprise. "Daughter?" He looked at Desba, who nodded slightly. This wasn't just any war chief. This was her father. "Yes, sir," Jack managed. "Found her during a storm. She was hurt bad. I couldn't just leave her." The war chief studied him for a long moment. Then he said something in Apache that made all the other warriors lower their rifles. He turned back to Jack. "My daughter says you are a good man. Says you helped her when you could have killed her or left her to die. Says you ride with her to stop war. This true?" "It's true," Jack said. "There are men, bad men, trying to make your people and mine fight each other. They've been stealing cattle, leaving false signs. They're planning an attack on your camp." The war chief's expression darkened. "When?" "Tomorrow dawn, maybe sooner. We heard them planning it. 15 men, heavily armed. Their leader is a man named Burke, used to be cavalry." At the mention of Burke's name, several warriors muttered angrily. The war chief spat on the ground. "Clayton Burke, I know this man. He is demon, kills for pleasure. Says he is soldier, but he is murderer." Desba spoke up in Apache again, urgently. Her father listened, then nodded slowly. He turned to the other warriors and gave orders. They scattered immediately, running back the way they'd come. "My daughter says you and her have planned to stop Burke," the war chief said to Jack. "Tell me this plan." That was the problem. They didn't really have a plan. They'd been making it up as they went. But looking at the expectant faces around him, Jack knew he had to come up with something fast. "The cattle," Jack said, thinking quickly. "Burke has stolen cattle in Red Canyon from both settlers and Apache. If we can get those cattle out, show them to the territorial marshal, we have proof of the conspiracy. Without proof, it's our word against Burke's." The war chief considered this. "You want Apache warriors to help steal cattle from canyon full of armed white men?" Put like that, it did sound crazy, but Jack pressed on. "Not steal, recover. Those cattle belong to your people and mine, and if we can get them out, move them somewhere safe, Burke loses his leverage. More importantly, we get evidence that can bring the law down on him properly." Desba added something in Apache, and her father's expression shifted. He looked between his daughter and Jack, then spoke in English again. "You trust this white man?" he asked Desba directly. "With my life," she answered, also in English so Jack could understand. "He had every reason to let me die or turn me over to his people. He chose to help instead. He risks everything to stop this war." The war chief was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that shocked Jack. He stepped forward and gripped Jack's arm in a warrior's greeting. "Any man my daughter trusts, I trust. We will help. But we do this my way with Apache tactics, agreed?" "Agreed," Jack said, hoping he wasn't making a huge mistake. They rode into the Apache camp an hour later. Jack tried not to stare, but he couldn't help it. He'd heard stories about Apache camps, usually involving bloodthirsty savages and piles of scalps. The reality was different. Families lived here. Children played in the dust. Women cooked over fires and tended to daily tasks. Old people sat in the shade, talking and laughing. It looked, Jack realized with surprise, a lot like any settler camp. Just people trying to live their lives. Of course, those people stopped and stared when they saw him. A white man riding into camp with warriors and the war chief's daughter? That was unusual enough to draw attention. Jack felt dozens of eyes on him, some curious, many hostile. Desba stayed close to him, her presence a silent message that he was under her protection. They rode to the center of camp where a large tent stood. The war chief dismounted and gestured for Jack and Desba to follow. Inside the tent, several older men were gathered. The tribal elders, Jack guessed. They looked up in surprise when Jack entered, hands going to weapons. But the war chief spoke quickly in Apache and they relaxed slightly. What followed was hours of discussion. Desba and her father explained everything. The cattle thefts, Burke's plan, what they'd overheard at Red Canyon. The elders listened carefully, asking questions through Desba when they needed Jack to clarify something. One elder, the oldest of them all, finally spoke directly to Jack in halting English. "Why you do this? You are white man. This not your fight." Jack thought about how to answer. He could talk about right and wrong, about justice and honor, but in the end he went with the simple truth. Because people are going to die if I don't. Good people on both sides. And because I met Desba, and she showed me that the stories I'd been told weren't the whole truth. I can't stand by and let innocent folks get killed over lies. The old elder translated this for the others. They spoke among themselves for a long time. Finally, the war chief spoke. "We will send warriors to Red Canyon tonight, but not to fight. To watch, to scout. If what you say is true, we will know Burke's plans. And when he comes, we will be ready." "There's more," Jack said. "I need to get to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. Bring him back with proper authority. But that's 3 days' ride and Burke attacks tomorrow." "Then you need to delay Burke," the war chief said simply. "Make it so he cannot attack tomorrow. Give yourself time to bring this marshal." Jack and Desba looked at each other. Delay 15 armed men? How were 2 people supposed to do that? But Desba was smiling. That fierce warrior smile Jack was learning to recognize. "I have idea," she said. "Very dangerous idea, but it might work." She laid out her plan to the elders. It was crazy, reckless, and stood a good chance of getting them both killed. But looking around the tent at these Apache leaders, seeing the children playing outside, thinking about his neighbors back home who'd be caught in the war Burke was planning, Jack knew they had to try. "When do we start?" he asked. "Tonight," Desba said. "We go back to Red Canyon tonight. We don't have time to waste." The war chief put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, speaking to her in Apache. Desba nodded, and Jack saw tears in her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. Her father then turned to Jack. "You protect my daughter. She protect you. You come back alive, both of you. This I command." "We'll do our best, sir," Jack promised. As the sun set, Jack and Desba prepared to ride out again. The warriors gave them supplies, fresh horses, weapons. Desba was given a new rifle, and Jack was surprised when one of the elders presented him with a beautifully crafted knife. "For the white man who saved War Chief's daughter," the elder said. "May it serve you well." Jack accepted it with thanks, tucking it into his belt. Around him, warriors were preparing too, getting ready to move out as scouts. The camp had transformed from a peaceful settlement into a war camp in just hours. But unlike the bloodthirsty savages from the stories, they reached Red Canyon just past midnight. The moon was high and bright, which was both good and bad. Good because they could see where they were going, bad because they could be seen too. Desba led them to a hiding spot in the rocks overlooking the canyon. Down below, the thieves' camp was quiet. A few men stood guard, but most were sleeping. Burke's tent stood dark and still. "They think they are safe here," Desba whispered. "No one has found them yet, so they are careless." Jack studied the layout carefully. The cattle were penned at the back just as before. The guards walked predictable patterns. These men had gotten comfortable in their fortress, which might be their downfall. Desba's plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. They would stampede the cattle, not out of the canyon completely, that would be impossible, but enough to create chaos, wake the camp, scatter the herd. In the confusion, Jack would slip down and set fire to Burke's tent. "Why the tent?" Jack had asked when she first explained it. "Because men like Burke keep records," Desba had answered. "He was soldier. Soldiers write everything down. He'll have lists of who he's stealing from, maybe plans written out. We burn the tent, we burn his proof. Make him panic. Panicked men make mistakes. It was smart, but incredibly dangerous. If anything went wrong, if they were spotted, they'd be trapped in the canyon with 15 angry men who wanted them dead." They waited until the guards changed shift. That moment of handover, when the tired guard was leaving and the fresh one just arriving, both men would be distracted. That was their window. Desba moved first. She was carrying 3 torches soaked in pitch and a flint striker. Jack had his rifle and the knife the Apache elder had given him. His heart was pounding so loud he was sure the guards could hear it. She made her way down the canyon wall like a cat, finding handholds Jack couldn't even see in the moonlight. He followed as best he could, moving slower, trying not to dislodge rocks that would clatter down and alert the camp. It took forever to reach the bottom. Jack's arms were shaking from the effort by the time his feet touched solid ground. Desba was already moving toward the cattle pen, staying in the shadows. The cattle stirred as they approached, sensing something wrong. A few snorted nervously. Jack held his breath, waiting for the guards to investigate, but the men were talking quietly by the fire, paying no attention. Desba lit the first torch. In the darkness, the flame seemed blindingly bright. Jack was sure someone would see, would shout alarm, but the camp stayed quiet. She threw the torch into the middle of the cattle pen. It landed in the hay bedding, and flames began to spread immediately. The cattle panicked instantly. They began to move, pushing against each other, building momentum. Desba lit the second torch and threw it to a different spot. More fire, more panic. The cattle were bellowing now, a sound that finally got the guards' attention. Fire, one of them shouted. The cattle are on fire. Men began pouring out of tents, half-dressed and confused. In the chaos, Desba threw the third torch directly at Burke's tent. It landed on the canvas roof, and the pitch-soaked material went up like paper. Now it was Jack's turn. While everyone was focused on the cattle stampede and the burning command tent, he sprinted toward the flames. He could see papers inside, documents on a small desk. He needed to make sure they burned completely, but Burke was faster than expected. The former cavalry officer came running out of his tent, arms full of papers and ledgers, trying to save them from the fire. He saw Jack and stopped cold. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Burke's face went from shock to rage in a heartbeat. You, Burke snarled. Sullivan! I should have known. Where's that Apache witch who shot my men? Jack didn't answer. He raised his rifle, but Burke was already moving, diving back into his burning tent. Jack heard him shouting for his men, calling Jack's name, telling them to shoot on sight. The cattle had broken through their pen now, stampeding through the camp. Men were diving out of the way, cursing and shouting. In the confusion, Jack couldn't get a clear shot at Burke. Then he felt rather than saw Desba beside him. We go now, she shouted over the noise. Mission complete, we go. But as they turned to run, gunfire erupted. Burke's men had spotted them. Bullets kicked up dirt at their feet. A tent pole next to Jack's head exploded in splinters. They ran for the canyon wall, bullets chasing them. Jack fired back blindly, just trying to keep the men's heads down. Desba was ahead of him, moving impossibly fast despite her still healing shoulder. Then Jack felt fire in his leg. He stumbled, nearly fell. He'd been hit. Not bad, just a graze, but enough to slow him down. Desba turned back, saw him limping. Without hesitation, she grabbed his arm and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the wall. Bullets whined past them like angry hornets. Climb, Desba ordered. I cover you. She pushed Jack toward the wall and turned, her rifle barking as she laid down covering fire. Jack scrambled up the rocks, his wounded leg screaming in protest. Blood was running down into his boot, making his grip slippery. More gunfire from below. Jack heard Desba cry out and looked back. She'd been hit too, in the same shoulder that was already wounded. But she kept firing, kept the men pinned down, giving Jack time to climb. Finally, Jack made it to the top. He turned and reached down for Desba. She grabbed his hand with her good arm, and he pulled with everything he had. She came up and over the edge just as a bullet struck the rock where her head had been a second before. They didn't stop. Couldn't stop. They ran, stumbling through the darkness, heading for where they'd left the horses. Behind them, they could hear Burke shouting orders, organizing pursuit. The horses were where they'd left them, thank God. Jack and Desba mounted up, both bleeding, both exhausted. As they kicked the horses into a gallop, Jack looked back once. Red Canyon was chaos. Fires burning, cattle scattered everywhere, men running in all directions. And standing in the middle of it all, silhouetted against the flames, was Burke. Even from this distance, Jack could feel the man's rage like a physical thing. They rode hard through the night. Blood loss and exhaustion made Jack dizzy. Beside him, Desba was swaying in her saddle, her wounded shoulder obviously giving her terrible pain. But they couldn't stop. Burke would be coming. As dawn broke, they reached a small creek. Desba pulled up, practically falling from her horse. Jack dismounted more carefully, his wounded leg barely holding his weight. We have to rest, Desba said through gritted teeth. The horses, too. They can't go on like this, she was right. The horses were lathered and blowing, pushed to their limits. Jack and Desba weren't much better. They found a spot with cover and tended to their wounds as best they could. Jack's leg wound was indeed just a graze, Painful, but not serious. Desba's shoulder was worse. The bullet had torn through the same area that was still healing from her first wound. She was losing blood and her face was pale. "I'm fine," she insisted when Jack tried to check it. "We don't have time. You need to ride to Santa Fe now. Get the marshal." "I'm not leaving you like this. You have to." Desba's voice was fierce despite her weakness. "This is the only way. Burke will chase us. If we stay together, he catches us both. But if you ride to Santa Fe and I lead him another direction, you have time to bring help." Jack knew she was right, but he hated it. They'd come this far together. Leaving her now, wounded and being hunted, felt like betrayal. "Your people," he said. "The warriors your father sent to scout. Where are they?" Desba pointed northeast. "Half day's ride that way. If I can reach them, I'll be safe. Burke won't attack a group of Apache warriors. It was a plan. Not a good one, but better than nothing. Jack would ride hard for Santa Fe, get the marshal. Desba would try to reach her people's scouts. They'd meet back at Jack's ranch in 3 days with help and hopefully stop Burke before he could recover. 3 days, Jack said. "You promise you'll be there?" 3 days, Desba agreed. "You promise same." They gripped hands, warrior to warrior. Jack could feel Desba's hand trembling slightly from blood loss, but her eyes were clear and determined. "You are a good friend, Jack Sullivan," she said. "Better than I expected when I first woke in your barn." "You're not so bad yourself," Jack replied, trying to smile despite everything. "For someone who scared me half to death when I first saw you." They mounted up one more time. Jack turned his horse toward Santa Fe. Desba headed northeast toward her people. Before they parted, Jack called back to her. "Don't die, you hear me? Your father will kill me if I let that happen." Desba laughed, though it turned into a cough. "Don't die either. My people want to thank the white man who helped their war chief's daughter. Hard to do if you are dead." Then they were riding away from each other, two wounded riders racing against time and pursuit. Jack pushed his horse hard, harder than he should have, but he had no choice. Every minute counted now. The morning sun climbed higher. Jack's leg throbbed with each stride of the horse. He was lightheaded from blood loss and lack of sleep, but he kept riding, kept pushing forward. Somewhere behind him, Burke and his men were coming. Somewhere to the northeast, Desba was trying to reach safety, and somewhere ahead in Santa Fe was the marshal who could end this once and for all. 3 days. That's all they had. 3 days to bring law and order to a lawless situation. 3 days to prevent the war that Burke so desperately wanted. Jack rode like the devil himself was chasing him because in a way he was. His wounded leg had gone from painful to numb, which he knew wasn't a good sign. The horse beneath him was at the edge of exhaustion, but he pushed on, switching to fresh horses at every way station he passed. The folks at the stations asked questions when they saw the blood on his pants and the wild look in his eyes. Jack paid double for the horses and didn't answer. He didn't have time for explanations. Santa Fe appeared on the horizon on the evening of the second day. Jack had ridden almost nonstop, catching maybe 4 hours of sleep total in small snatches. His eyes felt like they had sand in them, and his leg wound had started bleeding again from the constant riding. But he'd made it. 2 days instead of 3. That gave them 1 extra day, maybe just enough time. The territorial marshal's office was near the main plaza. Jack practically fell off his horse in front of it, his legs barely holding him when his feet hit the ground. He stumbled inside, probably looking like a madman. The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s named Tom Crawford. He looked up from his desk as Jack burst in, his hand going instinctively to his pistol. "Marshal Crawford?" Jack gasped. "I need help. There's going to be a war and I can stop it, but you have to come with me right now." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "Son, you look like you've been dragged behind a horse. Maybe you should sit down before you fall down." "No time." Jack lurched forward, gripping the marshal's desk for support. "Clayton Burke, former cavalry. He's got a gang in Red Canyon. Been stealing cattle from both settlers and Apache. He's trying to start a war so he can take the land." At the mention of Burke's name, Crawford's expression changed. "Clayton Burke? I've been trying to pin something on that man for 2 years. But he's smart. Never leaves evidence." "I've got evidence," Jack said. "Stolen cattle with brands from both sides. Witnesses who heard him planning an attack. But if we don't move now, people are going to die." Crawford studied Jack for a long moment. "You're Jack Sullivan. Got a ranch out near Apache territory. I've heard of you. Folks say you're honest, keep to yourself." "Right now, I'm the only thing standing between peace and bloodshed," Jack said. "And I need your help." The marshal stood up, reaching for his hat. "Tell me everything." And I mean everything. Start from the beginning. Jack told the story as quickly as he could, finding Desba, learning about the cattle thefts, discovering Burke's plan, the raid on Red Canyon. Crawford listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each detail. And this Apache woman, Crawford said when Jack finished. She's the war chief's daughter. And she's heading back to your ranch? Should be there in 3 days. That's where we agreed to meet. Her people are probably close by too, watching, making sure she's safe. Crawford was quiet for a moment, thinking, this could go very wrong very fast. Apache warriors surrounding your ranch, territorial marshal showing up, tensions high. One wrong move and we've got exactly the war you're trying to prevent. I know, Jack said, but it's the only way. We need the Apache to verify the stolen horses. We need you to verify the stolen cattle. And we need to do it before Burke recovers and tries something else. The marshal grabbed his rifle and called for his deputy. We ride at first light. I'm bringing 2 deputies and we'll pick up a few more men at Fort Union on the way. If Burke's got 15 men, I want to make sure we've got enough to handle them. No army, Jack said quickly. No cavalry. Half of them probably served with Burke. They'll side with him over an Apache warrior's word. Crawford nodded slowly. Good point. We'll stick to lawmen. Men I trust. But Sullivan, if this is a wild goose chase, if you're wrong about any of this... I'm not wrong, Jack said with more confidence than he felt. I just hope we're not too late. They rode out at dawn, 6 men total. The marshal, 2 deputies, Jack, and 2 federal lawmen Crawford had rounded up who specialized in territorial disputes. They pushed hard, but not as hard as Jack had on the way in. No point arriving with exhausted horses and men if they were riding into a potential fight. Jack used the time to rest and let his leg heal. One of the deputies had medical training and properly cleaned and bandaged the wound. It wasn't as bad as it had looked, but Jack had lost more blood than he'd realized. The deputy gave him beef broth and made him drink it, building his strength back. As they rode, Crawford asked more questions, trying to get every detail straight in his mind. Jack could tell the marshal was already building a case, thinking like a lawman about evidence and testimony and what would hold up in court. The problem, Crawford said on the second day, is that it's going to be hard to prove Burke ordered the attacks. We might get him for cattle theft, but conspiracy to start a war. That's trickier. What if someone heard him say it? Jack asked. Desba and I both heard him at Red Canyon, telling his men to attack the Apache camp. Your word and an Apache warriors against a former officer? I believe you, but a judge might not. We need something solid. Jack thought about the papers Burke had been trying to save from the burning tent. If they could find those, if Burke still had them, that might be the proof they needed. They reached Jack's ranch late on the 3rd day, just as the sun was setting. Jack's heart lifted when he saw it in the distance. Home. He'd made it back. But as they got closer, Jack's relief turned to ice-cold dread. The ranch was surrounded. Apache warriors, dozens of them, sat on their horses in a perfect circle around his property. They were absolutely still, weapons ready, watching and waiting. In the fading light, they looked like statues, silent and ominous. Sweet Jesus, one of the deputies whispered. There must be 50 of them. Crawford held up his hand, signaling his men to stop. Easy now. Nobody makes any sudden moves. Sullivan, you sure about this? Jack was staring at the warriors, trying to spot Desba or her father. But the light was failing and everyone looked the same in silhouette. Something's wrong, Jack said. They shouldn't be surrounding the place like this. They were supposed to be here to help, not to attack. Then he saw movement on the opposite ridge. More men on horses, but these weren't Apache. These were white men, settlers and militia from the look of them. And at their head, even from this distance, Jack recognized the tall figure of Clayton Burke. His stomach dropped. Burke had gotten here first. And from the looks of things, he'd convinced the local militia that the Apache were besieging Jack's ranch. It's a trap, Jack said. Burke's here. He's using my ranch as bait, trying to get the Apache and the militia to shoot each other. Crawford swore under his breath. That's why the Apache are in defensive positions. They're protecting someone inside. Your friend Desba must be in there. It was worse than that. As Jack looked closer, he could see that the Apache warriors weren't just surrounding his ranch randomly. They were positioned to defend against an attack from the militia's direction. And the militia was positioned to rescue Jack from what they thought was an Apache siege. 2 armed groups, both thinking they were in the right, both ready to fight. All it would take was one shot, One misunderstanding and the valley would explode into exactly the massacre Jack and Desba had fought so hard to prevent. "We have to stop this," Jack said urgently. "We have to get between them before someone starts shooting." "That's suicide," one of the deputies objected. "We'll be caught in the crossfire." But Crawford was already moving. "Sullivan's right. We're the law here. If we don't stop this, nobody will." He raised his voice. "All of you follow me, and for God's sake keep your weapons holstered unless I say otherwise." They rode forward slowly, deliberately, Crawford holding up his badge so both sides could see it. Jack's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break free from his chest. Every second, he expected to hear gunfire to see someone fall. The Apache warriors watched them approach but didn't move. The militia on the other ridge started shouting, telling Crawford to get out of the way, that they were going to clear out the Indians. And then Jack saw her, Desba, standing on his porch despite her wounds, tall and defiant. She was alive. She'd made it. Relief washed over him so powerfully he felt dizzy. But there was no time for relief. Burke was shouting now, pointing at Desba, calling her a savage and a murderer, telling the militia that she'd attacked his men unprovoked. Jack rode ahead of Crawford, straight toward his own porch. He dismounted, his wounded leg almost giving out, but he stayed standing. He turned to face both groups of armed men, standing in the middle of the circle with Desba beside him. In that moment, everything hung in balance. Dozens of weapons pointed at each other across his small ranch. One word, one gesture could end it all in blood. Jack took a deep breath and started walking. Not toward the Apache, not toward the militia. He walked straight into the middle of the space between them, unarmed and alone. "Jack, no!" Desba called out, but he kept walking. The militia leader, a man Jack recognized from town named Harrison, shouted at him. "Sullivan, get away from that savage! We're here to rescue you." "I don't need rescuing," Jack shouted back, his voice carrying across the valley. "And she's not a savage. Her name is Desba, and she saved my life." Burke's voice cut through the confusion. "He's been turned. The Apache got to him. He's a traitor to his own people." Jack turned to face Burke directly. "The only traitor here is you, Burke." The night passed slowly. Jack's ranch had become an unlikely gathering place for people who'd been enemies just hours before. Apache warriors camped on the east side of his property. Militiamen settled on the west. And in the middle, in Jack's cabin, the wounded were tended to. Desba's father had insisted she stay inside where she could be properly cared for. Jack's leg needed attention too. The deputy with medical training worked on both of them while Crawford kept watch outside, making sure the fragile peace held. "Never thought I'd see the day," the deputy muttered as he stitched Jack's leg wound. Apache and settlers camping together without shooting each other. "Maybe that's the problem," Jack said, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Nobody ever thought it possible, so nobody ever tried." Desba, sitting across from him while her shoulder was rebandaged, nodded in agreement. "My grandfather used to say the same thing. He said hate is easy. Peace is hard work. People choose easy too often. Through the night, people talked. Not much at first, just cautious exchanges. But gradually barriers started coming down. One of the militiamen recognized Apache markings on a horse and realized it had been stolen from his neighbor months ago. An Apache warrior pointed out cattle brands he'd seen at the Red Canyon camp that belonged to settlers he knew. Stories started emerging. Both sides had suffered from the thefts. Both sides had blamed each other. And Burke had counted on that, had fed those suspicions like kindling to a fire. Marshal Crawford questioned Burke through the night, but the former officer wouldn't talk. He sat in Jack's barn, hands tied, refusing to say a word. His men, caught at Red Canyon by the federal agents, were more cooperative. When faced with hanging for murder and conspiracy, they started talking fast. By morning, the full scope of Burke's operation was becoming clear. It wasn't just about cattle theft. Burke had been planning to take over huge sections of land once the Apache were driven out, and settlers were too scared to stay. He'd already made deals with land speculators back east, promising them cheap property once he'd cleared the area. "It's always about land," Crawford said, shaking his head as he read through the statements. "Always about money and land and power." The sun rose on a strange scene. Where there should have been a battlefield, there was instead an uneasy but genuine gathering. Apache women had brought food to share. Settler women, seeing this, had done the same. It wasn't friendship yet, but it wasn't hate either. It was a start. Desba's father came to the cabin at dawn, wanting to see his daughter. Jack started to leave to give them privacy, but the war chief gestured for him to stay. "You are part of this," he said through Desba's translation. "You should hear." The war chief spoke for a long time in Apache. Desba translated, her voice growing emotional as she did. He was talking about the old days before the wars, when some Apache and some settlers had traded peacefully. About his own father who'd believed coexistence was possible, about how violence and broken promises had destroyed those hopes. "But maybe," he said, looking at Jack, "maybe there is still hope. My daughter nearly died. You saved her. Then you risked everything to stop a war. You treated Apache as equals, as humans. This is rare among your people." Jack didn't know what to say. "I just did what seemed right." "Yes," the war chief agreed. "This is why it matters. You did not do it for reward or recognition. You did it because it was right. This is the mark of true honor." He placed his hand on Jack's shoulder, a gesture of respect that made several Apache warriors outside the cabin take notice. "From this day," the war chief declared loudly enough for others to hear, "Jack Sullivan is friend to the Apache. His land is protected. His name is honored. Any who harm him answer to me." It was more than Jack had expected, way more. He felt the weight of it, the responsibility. This wasn't just words. This was a binding promise that would change his life. "I'm honored, sir," Jack managed. "Truly. But I hope this means more than just protecting me. I hope it means we can all start seeing each other differently." The war chief smiled slightly. "Hope is good. But trust must be earned. Today is first step. Many more steps needed." He was right, of course. One act of courage didn't erase decades of conflict. But it was something. A crack in the wall of hatred that others might widen. Marshal Crawford returned with news as the morning progressed. The federal agents had found everything at Red Canyon. Dozens of head of stolen cattle, horses with Apache markings, and Burke's records. The man had kept detailed notes of everything, including his correspondence with land speculators. It was all the evidence needed to hang him and his gang. "We'll transport Burke to Santa Fe for trial," Crawford said. "His men are already in custody. This is going to be big news. Former cavalry officer caught conspiring to start a range war? The newspapers will eat this up." Jack wasn't looking forward to that kind of attention, but if it meant the truth got told, he'd endure it. "What about the cattle?" he asked. "The stolen livestock?" "We'll identify them by brand and return them to their rightful owners," Crawford replied. "Both settler and Apache. Might take some time, but it'll get done." It was then that Harrison, the militia leader, approached. He looked uncomfortable, hat in his hands. "Sullivan, I owe you an apology," he said. "We nearly started a war over lies. Nearly killed innocent people because we didn't question what we were told. That's on us, on me." Jack nodded. Burke knew exactly what buttons to push. He counted on fear and prejudice. We all fell for it to some degree. "Still," Harrison insisted, "you risked your life to stop it. If there's anything you need, anything at all, you just ask." Other militia members echoed the sentiment. They were embarrassed by how close they'd come to disaster, and grateful to Jack for preventing it. But it was what happened next that truly surprised Jack. Harrison turned to face the Apache camp and called out loudly, "I'd like to speak to the war chief if he's willing." Through Desba, the invitation was extended. The war chief rode over slowly, flanked by two warriors. The two leaders faced each other across a divide that had seemed impossible to cross just yesterday. "I won't insult you by claiming to speak for all settlers," Harrison said, with Desba translating. "But I speak for the men here. We were wrong. We let Burke manipulate us into almost attacking your people. For that I apologize." The war chief was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Your words are good, but words are easy. What matters is what comes next. Will you remember this? Will you tell others what really happened here? Will you speak against hate when you hear it among your people?" Harrison nodded slowly. "I will. We all will. You have my word." "Then I accept your apology," the war chief said, "and I offer the same to you. My people were prepared to fight. We believe the worst about settlers because we have seen the worst. But Jack Sullivan showed us that not all white men are the same. Perhaps we too must remember this." The two men didn't shake hands. The gap was still too wide for that. But they nodded to each other with respect, and that was more than Jack had dared hope for. As the day wore on, People began to disperse. The Apache warriors prepared to return to their camp, taking Desba with them so she could heal properly among her people. The militia members headed back to their ranches and farms, carrying with them a story that would change how people thought about the Apache. Crawford and his men prepared to transport Burke to Santa Fe for trial. The former officer was sullen and silent, but his eyes burned with rage when they passed Jack. "This isn't over," Burke hissed. "You think you've won, but you've just painted a target on your back. My people will come for you." Jack met his gaze steadily. "Your people are either dead or in chains. And even if they weren't, I'm not alone anymore. I've got friends now. That's something you never understood. You only knew how to use people. I learned how to stand with them." Burke spat at Jack's feet, but he had nothing else to say. Crawford's men hauled him away. Before the Apache left, Desba came to say goodbye. Her shoulder was properly bandaged now, and her father had arranged for a travois to carry her so she wouldn't have to ride. "I don't like goodbyes," she said to Jack. "They feel too final." "Then don't think of it as goodbye," Jack replied. "Think of it as see you later. Your father said my ranch is under Apache protection now. I figure that means you'll come by to check on me sometimes." Desba smiled. "Maybe I will. Someone needs to make sure you don't get into more trouble." "Me? Get into trouble? That's rich coming from the woman who got shot twice in 2 weeks." They both laughed. The easy laughter of people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. "You changed my life, Jack Sullivan," Desba said more seriously. "When I fell in that mud during the storm, I thought I was dying. I never expected to wake up being cared for by a white man. It made me question everything I thought I knew. You changed mine too," Jack admitted. "Made me see that the stories I'd been told were only half-truths. Made me realize that honor and courage don't have a color." The war chief called out that it was time to leave. Desba clasped Jack's hand one more time in a warrior's grip. "You are my friend," she said. "My true friend. Not many people can say that about someone from the other side. We are lucky." "We are," Jack agreed. He watched as the Apache departed, Desba waving from her travois until they disappeared over the ridge.